carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that is heating up the atmosphere. But that's not the end of the story.
Historically, all the sources of carbon dioxide also emit aerosol, also produce this particulate smog that's been cooling the Earth. And Dr. James Hansen, who is considered a grandfather of the global warming theory, he pointed out that these two emissions roughly cancel each other out. So historically, we've seen roughly zero warming from sources of carbon dioxide so far.
So if not carbon dioxide, what is causing global warming? A primary factor is methane, which traps 100 times as much heat as carbon dioxide in the near term. A recent assessment sponsored by the UN Environment Program and World Meteorological Organization shows that it is possible to curb global warming very quickly by reducing methane emissions. Along with climate protection, this would also bring significant health, agricultural, and ecological benefit. Researchers note as well that because livestock raising is the single largest source of methane generated by human activities, becoming a vegan is the fastest way to reduce methane emissions, as stated by Dr. Terry Root of Stanford University, USA.
We need to decrease the amount of methane that we're putting up. And one way is to become vegetarian. It really, truly makes a difference.
Stop the methane. Stop the real cause of global warming. Be veg, go green to save the planet.
Methane and carbon dioxide. A closer look at the numbers.
Global warming potential, or GWP, is a measure of how much a greenhouse gas contributes to global warming.
The GWP of carbon dioxide is defined as 1. The warming potentials of all other gases are ranked in comparison to CO2. The GWP of methane, for example, is 72 when averaged over 20 years. In other words, methane heats the atmosphere 72 times more than CO2 over the course of 20 years.
The reason that it's a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is because the structure of the molecule traps more of the infrared radiation, more of the heat.
Where does methane come from?
Human methane emissions are from meat or from livestock.
One cow produces 200 pounds of methane each year, an equivalent of 14,400 pounds of CO2. Due to intensive livestock raising, there are today more than 1.53 billion cows in the world, each emitting 200 pounds of methane, leading to an astounding 21.6 trillion pounds of CO2 equivalent emitted annually.
This is more than
3 times the world's cars, all the power plants in the world, all the emissions of industrialized nations of Australia, Brazil, Canada, France, Japan, United Kingdom, and United States combined.
Climate change scientists have concluded that while looking at all their data about the destruction of the planet, we still need to try to reduce aggregate greenhouse gases 80% by 2050. We all know it's going to be hard to do with the population growing and with the technology still emerging. However, if you went after the 2 most potent, quickly dispersing forms of greenhouse gases, methane and its variants, and black carbon, then you might buy the entire world another 20 years to deal with the larger issue.
greenhouse gases take varying times to dissipate and thereby stop warming the atmosphere.
Methane takes only 8 to 12 years to stop warming the atmosphere, whereas carbon dioxide takes up to dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of years.
This is very important that everybody understand this. It's so much cheaper to go after methane than to change the whole structure by which carbon dioxide goes in the atmosphere.
What needs to be done is not to concentrate on carbon dioxide and do the things that can be done, which means that you go to the next and most important gas, which is methane. You can say, all right, we will not eat meat. We will not grow meat for others to eat.
Stop methane. Stop global warming. Fast.
Animal agriculture. The facts. In 2006, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, had estimated that raising animals for meat and dairy was responsible for 18% of global warming, more than all the world's transportation put together.
The 18% figure is an underestimate.
Maybe considerably more, important of which is methane.
However, it is becoming increasingly clear to scientists that the livestock industry is playing a more significant role.
I've received a number of emails from people that I respect saying that the 18% figure is an underestimate. It's a low estimate, and in actual fact it's much higher.
And I just had some information just recently that the new figures now indicate that at least half of the greenhouse gases that are up there now, not the 15 or 20%, at least half, and maybe considerably more, are due to livestock production.
Greenhouse gases are emitted during virtually every step of the meat producing process, including the three major greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane. However, what is unaccounted for is the fact that instead of the 23 times figure used in most reports, including that of the United Nations, methane is actually 72 to 100 times more potent than CO2 over a 20-year period.
If you look at these reports, they'll suggest it has about 25 times the impact of CO2, but really when it's up there in the atmosphere doing its work, it's 72 times the impact, and that makes a big difference.
Methane is trapping in just 12 years 25 times as much heat as carbon dioxide does in a century. If you look in a shorter time scale and say how much warming over the next 20 years is this quantity of carbon dioxide going to cause versus this quantity of methane, then the methane causes 72 times as much warming as the carbon dioxide over 20 years.
At 37% of global methane emissions, livestock is the single largest source of human-caused methane.
Sure, we have to deal with CO2 in the long run. But if you want to make an impact on climate in the next 20 years, the place to do it is with the shorter-lived greenhouse gases, most important of which is methane. So of the emissions in the next 20 years, the CO2 in this year's emissions will only be about 40% of the total warming. The other 60% or more will be from the shorter-lived gases, most important of which is methane.
Livestock has an even larger share of emissions when yet another unaccounted factor is acknowledged: aerosols, or particles released along with CO2 from burning fossil fuels that, despite their detrimental health aspects, actually have a cooling effect.
So when you burn these fossil fuels, you get carbon dioxide, which heats the planet, and aerosols, which cool the planet. And the net effect, if you calculate them out, comes out to about zero. They roughly cancel each other out. So the warming we've been seeing and are likely to see in the near future is dominated by other sources, the main one of which is methane. We have a critical environmental crisis now happening with effects that we're seeing around the world, and if we want to address the warming we're seeing now, the best bang for our buck comes in addressing the other gases, mostly methane, and its number one source, animal agriculture.
Because meat producing causes 80% of global warming because of related pollution from various angles: transportation, water, deforestation, refrigeration, medical care for animals and humans, and etc., etc. All kind of pollution coming from meat production. It's not just the land that they use, it's not just the methane gas and nitrous oxide that they produce. It is all these byproducts. There's no end to the list. We cannot rely on green technology alone to save the planet, because the worst cause of it is from meat industry. Everybody knows it. All the scientists already reported to us.
But in actual fact, it's much higher.
It's 72 times the impact.
If you want to make an impact on climate,
the best bang for our buck comes in addressing animal agriculture.
Be veg, go green to save the planet. For more urgent details, please visit suprememastertv.com/SOS.